With the simple act of loading a videotape into a VCR, man can now study the past news events that have dramatically shaped his world. Walden Books and MPI Home Video now present a collection of videotapes that recount the past news events that have gripped our nation. The title of the collection is The Great TV News Stories. Each of the 14 volumes of Great TV News Stories are brilliantly produced, utilizing exclusive footage and interviews from the world-renowned resources of ABC News as the events happened before the eyes of the world. Events that have shocked, outraged, filled us with a renewed sense of patriotism, and changed the way we look upon our world forever. Through the miracle of videotape, you can now relive these spectacular events over and over again. Every video collector will want to own the entire Great TV News Stories collection for their personal video library.
Vietnam. In 20 years, it grew from a distant aggravation to a national nightmare. April 29, 1975, the final day of the Vietnam War. South Vietnam, our ally for decades, was disintegrating fast, its army in disarray, the Saigon government in chaos. Steamrolling toward the heart of South Vietnam, the communist offensive, in its path, a terrified exodus of South Vietnamese and almost 2,000 Americans trapped in Saigon. From Washington, the order came down, get them out now. In the final hours of the Vietnam War, America undertook a desperate and heroic mission under the most perilous conditions, a total U.S. evacuation, Operation Frequent Wind. This is the story of the fall of Saigon, of the final defeat of the capital city of South Vietnam, and of the life and death struggle to escape to America in the face of the enemy. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcast of a great TV news story, the turbulent end of a tragic war, America's final hours in Vietnam.
Ladies and gentlemen, our ambassador has left, and the evacuation can be said to be completed.
Kissinger, exhausted and relieved it was finally over, left the press conference to get dressed for a black tie dinner at the White House for Jordan's King Hussein.
Everybody was standing around in black tie, and I looked into Kissinger's office, and there he was pulling a tie out of this paper bag.
What Kissinger did not know was that 10 Marines, the embassy's security force, had not been lifted out. In fact, they had just begun closing down the embassy.
As everybody was slapping each other on the back and congratulating one another, word came in that they had overlooked the final perimeter guards around the embassy. They neglected to remove them from the top of the embassy.
Instantly, a helicopter was dispatched, and at 8:35 in the morning of April 30th, the forgotten Marines were picked up. The war was finally over. It was an ending perhaps best put by this cable the CIA sent to Washington just hours before. Wish to advise that this will be final message from Saigon Station. It has been a long and hard fight, and we have lost. Let us hope that we will not have another Vietnam experience and that we have learned our lesson. Saigon signing off.
The American space program. For 25 years and 55 manned flights, it seemed as close to perfect as mankind can get. January 28, 1986. 7 astronauts, including New Hampshire school teacher Krista McAuliffe, board the Space Shuttle Challenger and rocket toward the heavens. School children across America tune in to watch. Before the nation's eyes, it happens. The crew is killed, the spacecraft destroyed. It was the worst disaster in the history of spaceflight. This is a story of the Challenger disaster, of the 7 heroes who died and the nation that mourned them, of the investigation that shook a proud organization to its roots and revealed the flaws that led to tragedy. And finally, it is a story of a dream reborn, America's triumphant return to space. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, from disaster to discovery, the Challenger explosion and the rebirth of America's space shuttle.
the liftoff appeared flawless. The spectators, including Krista McAuliffe's parents, Grace and Edward Corrigan, watched proudly through tears of joy. 65 seconds into flight, NASA Control orders Commander Scobie to go to full power.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
Suddenly, an explosion.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
NASA loses all communication with Challenger, but the crowd still does not realize that something's gone wrong. Within seconds, Challenger disintegrates.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
For the spectators and Krista McAuliffe's parents, joy turns to confusion, worry, and a realization of tragedy. The $1.2 billion spaceship, its 7 crew members, and their satellite payload disappear.
The awesome power of nature, at once beautiful and terrifying, benevolent and cruel, constantly changing, destroying and renewing its contours, the planet Earth makes no allowance for man. But of all the planet's great exhibitions of might, none is more powerful and fearsome than a volcano. On May 18, 1980, in Washington State, a volcano erupted with the shattering strength of a hydrogen bomb, flattening forests like kindling and searing the life out of 100 square miles of timberland. The gigantic blast sent a cloud of black ash around the world and formed a lethal river of mud that smothered everything in its path. This is the story of the eruption of Mount St. Helens, of the Earth's terrible power and man's valiant attempts to adapt and learn from it, of the tragedy of its victims and the triumph of those who survived, and of a continuing threat still as frightening and unpredictable as ever before. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, Volcano, the eruption of Mount St. Helens.
This is how Mount St. Helens looked 2 days before it began erupting, March 27th, a volcano that had been sleeping for 123 years. And this is Mount St. Helens today, after yesterday's massive eruption that blew away 1,200 feet of the top. The thundering explosion was heard 200 miles away and sent tons of mud and molten glass tumbling into the Toutle River. 4 separate walls of water swept downstream, wiping out scores of homes and some lumber camps. Today, the floodwaters are receding and exposing much of the damage that was hidden by the high waters. Near the mouth of the Toutle River, a strange phenomenon appeared this afternoon. It appears to be a steam vent that keeps the water roiling. National Guard and Air Force helicopters are flying search patterns along the valley, looking for the more than 20 persons listed as missing. Even as the search continues, people are still getting into trouble. This afternoon, this pickup truck was driven into mud that covers the highway along the Toutle River. But that's a minor problem. All along the riverbed, trucks and cars were tossed aside like worn-out toys. This was once a major lodging camp of the Weyerhaeuser Corporation. Homes and summer cottages that owners believed were safely tucked back in the forest that lines the river were crushed by the walls of water that hit with almost no warning.
1960, dawn of a dramatic decade. The American presidential campaign pits the privileged son of one of America's wealthiest families against the vice president of the United States, who serves in the shadow of World War II hero and 2-term president Dwight D. Eisenhower. The Democratic nominee is John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The Republican nominee is Richard Milhouse Nixon, both men destined to leave an indelible mark on history. The candidates agree to an unprecedented series of 4 live televised debates. Nixon hopes to erase his image as an unpleasant, negative campaigner. Kennedy, too, seeks to alter his image, that of a rich young man without the maturity or experience to lead the nation through the Cold War. In one of the closest presidential elections ever, many say it is the new mass medium, television, that makes the difference. This is the story of the great debates, of the historic challenge never before possible of 2 candidates face-to-face live on nationwide television. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, The Great Debates. John F. Kennedy versus Richard M. Nixon.
I would say that the people now have the opportunity to evaluate his as against mine, and I think both he and I are going to abide by whatever the people decide.
Senator Kennedy?
Well, I'll just say that the question is of experience, and the question also is what our judgment is of the future, and what our goals are for the United States, and what ability we have to implement those goals. Abraham Lincoln came to the presidency in 1860 after a rather little-known session in the House of Representatives, and after being defeated for the Senate in '58, and was a distinguished president. There is no certain road to the presidency. There are no guarantees that if you take one road or another that you will be a successful president. I have been in the Congress for 14 years. I have voted in the last 8 years, when the Vice President was presiding over the Senate and meeting his other responsibilities. I have met decisions over 800 times on matters which affect not only the domestic security of the United States, but as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The question really is, which candidate and which party can meet the problems that the United States is going to face in the 60s?
It is a dream as old as humanity, leaving the Earth behind, soaring into space, walking on the moon. In the 1960s, America did it. It was man's greatest adventure. Two great superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, locked in a Cold War. Both nations believed that whoever controlled the heavens would control life on Earth. America won the race for the moon. This is a story of America's race for space, from the shock of Sputnik to John Glenn's flight into Earth orbit, from America's first walk in space to Neil Armstrong's first step on the surface of the moon. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcast of a great TV news story, Racing for the Moon, America's glory days in space.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you... For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure they too join with America in recognizing what an immense feat this is.
The scourge of terrorism, a savage war, conceived in shadows, played out for all the world to see. Secret armies paralyze our governments and exploit our fears, exacting a brutal toll. It is an ever-present threat. Innocent men and women drawn into an unfamiliar world of political violence, mortal danger, even death. In June of 1985, the threat of terror once again became reality. A commercial airliner hijacked on a routine flight from Athens to Rome. What followed was an odyssey of horror and tragedy, of hope and despair, of frustration and great courage. Here, under unexpected and terrifying circumstances, the mettle of men was tested. Some proved cruel and cowardly. Some proved heroic and noble. This is the story of the hijack of TWA Flight 847. It was snatched from its course and its passengers held hostage while the world stood helplessly by. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcast of a great TV news story, 17 Days of Terror, the hijack of TWA Flight 847.
Do you have any messages for your families?
Yes, I would like for my wife and my family and all of my friends back in Missouri to know that the Lord has taken very good care of us so far, and He's seen us through some very trying times, and He'll see us through to the end.
Captain, many people in America are calling for some kind of rescue operation or some kind of retaliation. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that we'd all be dead men if they did, because we're continually surrounded by many, many guards.
Do you have any thoughts on whether or not the United States should ask Israel to release the people it's holding in Israel?
No, I don't comment.
November 1979. Fanatical supporters of Iran's new leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, storm the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and take everyone they find there hostage. American citizens, soldiers, and diplomats, bound, blindfolded, paraded before the world. Images of humiliation and helplessness sear their way into the hearts and minds of America. The greatest power on earth, unable to deal effectively with a nation that sometimes seems possessed by madness. This is the story of 444 days that changed the course of history. A time of outrage and heartbreak, of broken promises and dashed hopes, of a king without a country, and a president held powerless in the fierce grip of Islamic fundamentalism. It was a time when heroes died in a tragically failed rescue mission. And finally, it was time for freedom. At the moment, America turned to a new leader. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story. America held hostage, the Iran crisis.
We tried, we failed, and we have paid a price. The bodies of 8 young Americans still lie in the Iranian desert, victims of the tragic end to a daring and dangerous attempt to rescue the hostages in Tehran. There, the embassy gates are still locked. The terrorists have strengthened their guard, and the hostages remain in captivity. So far as is known, they are safe. No action has been taken against them because their country tried to save them.
President Ronald Reagan called him a barbarian. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat called him 100% sick and possessed by the devil. But to his followers, he is a proud symbol of independence from foreign domination, a visionary leading the Arab world to a single unified nation. He seized control of his government at the age of 27. 20 years later, he was called the most dangerous man alive. This is the story of the enigmatic leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, of the worldwide campaign of terror he is accused of supporting, of the stories of hit squads dispatched on murder missions around the globe. One hit squad supposedly sent to assassinate the President of the United States. One incident after another, from aerial dogfights to a terror bombing of American soldiers in Berlin. And finally, this is the story of America's deadly payback, the United States bombing of Libya. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story. Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's radical ruler.
He's been called the world's #1 terrorist, a madman who exports terrorism around the world. He's accused of sending death squads overseas to eliminate his enemies. He's provided a haven for airline hijackers and support and weapons for liberation movements. He's violently anti-Zionist and just last week called for Arab states to destroy Israeli nuclear installations. It's reported he once tried to buy an atomic bomb, and he's still trying to get one. He appears to have embraced the Soviet Union and thus has given Moscow a new foothold in the Middle East. He even tried to buy influence in the United States when he hired Billy Carter. He's also been accused of being a man who dreams of empire.
The Soviet Union, behind an iron curtain of secrecy, a brutally repressive society. On the world stage, a military powerhouse and sponsor of regional conflict. Once America's ally, but for the past 40 years, our bitter enemy in a superpower stalemate that has threatened to destroy the world. At the seat of Soviet power, the old inflexible men of the Politburo, their hawkish ideology forged in the angriest years of the Cold War. In 1985, ascending into this frigid and perilous climate came Mikhail Gorbachev, a youthful, vigorous leader determined to change his country's society, its economy, and its dangerous relationship with America. This is the story of the emergence of Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, of the most sweeping changes in the Soviet Union since the Russian Revolution, and of a series of unprecedented summits between the leaders of the world's greatest nations and their bold initiatives to pull their nations back from the brink of nuclear war. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, Red Star Rising, the dawn of the Gorbachev era.
There was a sense of power and history at the White House this morning, unmatched in recent times, as the old anti-communist warrior Ronald Reagan welcomed the younger aggressive leader of the Soviet Union. General Secretary Gorbachev may not technically rate the 21-gun salute given a head of state, but he got one nonetheless. A recognition of the power that he and the president share in the nuclear age, and of the history of a tense superpower relationship which this visit could help make easier.
Today marks a visit that is perhaps more momentous than many which have preceded it, because it represents a coming together not of allies, but of adversaries. And yet I think you'll find during your stay that the American people believe that a stranger is a friend they have yet to meet, and that there's still a wellspring of goodwill here.
The stunning spectacle of nature, strange, beautiful, and enormously destructive. In the 1980s, the Earth seemed almost to rebel, showing its fierce strength with a brutality unlike anything in recent memory. Earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, raging fires, and deadly cold. The sheer force and variety of nature's calamities rocked all corners of the globe as people drowned, froze to death, suffocated in rivers of mud, and were buried alive under mountains of rubble. Children were orphaned, whole families rendered homeless refugees. The common thread, the constant fury of nature, an unceasing assault that tested man's courage and his will to survive. This is the story of the planet Earth's terrible capacity for destruction, a story of overwhelming human tragedy, but also a story of survival, of heroism, and the triumph of the human spirit in the face of chaos. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, Nature's Fury, a decade of disasters. Watergate. The White House called it a third-rate burglary, but it escalated into the worst political scandal in American history. President Richard Nixon, only months after landslide re-election, finds himself haunted by a question that will not go away.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
For the first time in the nation's 198-year history, a president resigns his office before his term is over. This is the story of the fall of Richard Milhouse Nixon, of the charges of corruption and cover-up, of high crimes and misdemeanors in the White House, of the battle for the secret tapes that held the proof, of the disgrace of the president's men, and the ultimate triumph of the American system. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, Dark Days at the White House, the Watergate scandal, and the resignation of President Richard M. Nixon. Lebanon, the most dangerous place on earth. A land torn apart by religious and political differences, for generations engulfed by bitter civil war. Once the pearl of the Middle East, now the violent vortex of regional conflict. In the 1970s, into the Lebanese countryside came the Palestinian army, determined to destroy Israel. From Lebanon, the PLO waged a campaign of terror and destruction against Israel. Israel, in turn, launched counterstrikes, further tearing at the fragile fabric of Lebanon. In 1982, Israel decided to finish the PLO once and for all. This is the story of Israel's invasion of Lebanon, of an attempt to obliterate a dangerous enemy, of the bloody conquest of Beirut, of the innocent civilians caught tragically in the middle, and of the horrible price paid when Israel changed from David to Goliath. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story. Israel versus the PLO, the invasion of Lebanon. The cities tell a tale of horror. Beirut, London, Paris, Rome. The bloody reality of terrorism and the fear it spreads throughout the world. Again and again, innocents are attacked by small fanatical groups, terrorists, sometimes acting on their own, sometimes enlisting the support of an international network. Their goals may be political, or they may be religious. They seek to publicize their cause, to outrage, to shock. In this, they invariably succeed. They have initiated a new reign of terror. This is a story of a new kind of battlefield, a new kind of war, of the tragedy in Munich, of suicide bombings in Beirut, of attack after attack on the innocent civilians of all the nations of the world. And it is the story of the search for a way to fight back, of the armies, governments, and private organizations dedicated to a seemingly impossible task, to end the slaughter, to end the worldwide movement toward terror. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, Terror, the New World War. The Middle East, at the crossroads of 3 continents, the sacred home of 3 religions, a land of ancient conflicts, still the center of a desperate struggle. The state of Israel, committed to survival, her Arab neighbors committed to her destruction. Beneath the sand, the world's richest supply of oil, fueling the rivalry of the superpowers. In the 1970s, the leaders of 3 nations cut through age-old hatreds and modern tensions to forge a treaty of peace. The man who made the first move was the president of Egypt. This is the story of the struggle for peace led by Anwar Sadat. He turned his back on history and the wishes of the nation he led to begin the struggle for peace. Sadat gambled with destiny and lost his life in the process, cut down by assassins' bullets. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, Death on the Nile, the struggle for peace, and the assassination of Anwar Sadat.